Okay, next thing we're going to look at is Newton's first law of motion. So, Newton's first law of motion works in a number of different ways. Okay, so if we have an object and there is no forces acting on it at all. So if we have a box floating in deep, deep space and there's absolutely no forces, that object will do one of two things. So Newton's first law states that if the resultant force is zero, the object will either stay at rest if it was at rest, so it will remain stationary, stopped, or if it was moving, it will continue to move at a constant speed in a straight line. But the same is also true if we have an object that the resultant force is zero. So it doesn't have to have no forces acting on it, but the resultant force needs to be zero. So here, the resultant force is zero, so that object will either stay at rest or continue to move at the same speed in a straight line, and you need that last bit in a straight line in your definition. However, the reverse is also true, that let's say I have a car and it's stationary, then Newton's first law tells us the resultant force must be zero. Therefore, if it has a weight downwards of, let's say, 2,000 newtons, well then there must be an upwards force due to the road being there of 2,000 newtons. Okay? Likewise, if we're told this car isn't stationary, let's say we're told that it is moving at a constant velocity of 30 meters per second. The fact that it's 30 doesn't make any difference. It's the fact that it's a constant velocity tells us that the resultant force is zero. Now, if it's moving at a constant velocity of 30 meters per second, the engine must be on and it must be producing a thrust forwards. Let's say it's 4,000 newtons. But because it's constant, we know the resultant force needs to be zero. Okay? If this was the only force that acts on it, that would cause the car to accelerate. But it's not accelerating because the velocity is constant. Therefore, the resultant force must be zero. So that tells us that there must be a backwards force of 4,000 newtons. And what can produce that? Friction, or air resistance, or drag. Okay?